Input on non-agenda items. And I will start, I have two blue slips here from Bob. So Bob Cameron, if you could step forward and state your name and address for the record, please. And tell me which one you're going to speak on first. Doesn't matter.
I was thinking the non-agenda item, the triplex and
Okay.
duplexes.
Let's go with that.
Yeah. My name is Bob Canberra. I am a citizen of Canby. I live at 1338 North Maple. And I'm here this afternoon to kind of speak about, recently at the legislature they passed new laws that allow duplexes and triplexes to be built within typically a single family home division. I'm not here to talk about necessarily the goods or bads of that decision, but I want to talk just briefly about the ramifications that I believe the Planning Commission and the Planning Department should take into account when they look at those kinds of issues. One is, I noticed on my street, as you might have noticed on your street, that very few people ever use their garages to park in. The far majority of people use that as storage. Like I took a poll of my own roadway of about 20-something houses, only 3 use their garage as a garage. We use ours as a garage. My wife parks her car there. So, but that implication is that that the people, to make up for their space, they have to park on the roadways, especially in the cases of duplexes and triplexes, because typically what happens with a duplex is you have a garage and you have a driveway to that garage, and that's it. So if you're eliminating one parking stall, which is the garage, that second car, which is most households have more than one car. So they're parking on the roadway, as is typical with a lot of our neighborhoods. That means if you put a double occupancy on the same space that you would a single family dwelling, you're increasing the number of cars that are going to be parked in the neighborhoods. I think we seriously need to look at the impact on the neighborhoods. Some of our older neighborhoods do not have the road width to absorb so much parking on the roads. It makes it hazardous. Some of those places do not have sidewalks. So it increases the tension there. Example, the new duplex that is being developed right at that point near the fairgrounds. Because of the size of that place, I have some intuition that feels that garages won't be used as garages. That means that they're going to try to find parking on those narrow roadways that branch off, that come into that area. I'm just saying, as we plan and look forward and try to implement this rule, we need to be mindful of the impact it will have on our roadways and of pedestrians trying to walk on those roadways. So please look at that. Lastly, about this issue is the size of the driveways that are being approved. You know, they do fit a standard car, but it seems that all our SUVs that are being bought, or the trucks that are being bought by people around town, are much larger than the driveways that are being built. That they're going to overlap and occupy the sidewalks that are being asked to do. All I'm asking is, as you go forward and you ask the planning department to look at the size of the vehicles that people are purchasing and are going to be parking, and are they going to be overlapping into the walkways of pedestrians or the impact of the neighborhoods? Done.
Okay. Does anybody want to have any comment on, I think you're referring to HB 2001.
I believe so.
So does anybody have any thoughts on that they would like to share?
I do. I think Mr. Camber's points are excellent points. I agree with almost every one of them. Well, with all of them. As you know, I complained in the last meeting about that HB 2001. And I recommended that we just fight it, but I don't know if that'll happen or not. And as far as the trucks, and I agree, I have a two-car garage, and we park our cars in the driveway because they just don't build houses with storage like they used to. As far as the trucks extending over the driveway onto the sidewalk, I see it all over the neighborhood, and it is, I believe, a code violation, but it's something that it's up to the neighbors. If it bothers them, they've got to, and then I'm sure something will be done about it. But I agree with all what you just said. And I thank you, and when we do have the next new subdivision, or they're coming in to build, and somebody's wanting to put a duplex or triplex in a single-family zoned area, I would greatly appreciate you coming in and bringing all of these points up again. And I believe you will. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that? Well, I do. I too agree with you. And I think that if I had my way, that Canby would be a sanctuary city from such legislative foolishness. I think that it will change the nature and the ambiance of Canby in ways we can't even imagine. I think it's people make decisions like that without actually coming and visiting places like Canby. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
And I'm not even speaking to the issue about whether they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying, if you do, please make sure you approve the ones that fit, not just blanketly approve things that are going to cause down the road problems that will be very expensive to solve and endanger people.
Okay.
So be selective in your approval.
Thank you very much. Now I have another blue slip here. Oddly enough, Bob, you're up again. And so I guess for the record, restate your name and address, and you're going to be speaking on the storage unit issue, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Bob Canberra, 1338 North Maple here in Canby. My only concern was when I read the write-up provided by the Planning Commission, I thought they did a good, planning department, they did a good job. But they don't talk about, which I would think you guys would want to know, is how many units, how many acres of land and how many units of occupancy are remaining in the industrial area. My impression is that as I drive through it, it's a popular area. It's being developed as your plan calls for, which is the vision was to have people occupy this popular place so that they would create jobs for the community and have, places for people to work. This storage unit will probably have very limited employment, maybe one or two people on site to make sure the gates are opening and closing. So it doesn't fit the vision. Now, if you have tons of acreage out there that's not being occupied or is not projected to be occupied, then, bless its heart. But if you have a very popular commodity that is accomplishing your goal, and you should be treating it like gold, then shouldn't that be taken into account and written into the report that you've got so much acreage that's being used on a monthly basis, that is projected to be used up and accomplish your goal? I just think that that's something that's a gap in the decision-making that you were going to do that I needed to bring to your attention, because as a citizen, that's what drew me to be very concerned. So I leave that to you.
Okay. Any comment? Thank you very much. Okay, we have the approval of minutes of the Planning Commission for July 7th. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes for July 7th, 2019.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No. I haven't seen it. They were emailed to you on Friday.
Okay, that's my fault then, but I still haven't seen it, so.
I might make a note that it actually is the 8th, so the agenda is listed wrong. Because the minutes themselves say a Monday, July 8th.
Okay. Okay, new business. We will discuss determination in an M1 light industrial use zone for a personal mini warehouse.
Hi,
You're on.
thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, Sandy Freund, City of Canby Planning Division. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so try not to infect anybody.
It's terrible to have a cold in the dead of summer,
It
isn't
is.
it?
I agree.
Why don't you just postpone that until winter when it's more appropriate? Could you
Let's
put
speak
that
to the
down?
man upstairs and see if he can arrange that.
We'll work on that.
So this is a use determination that the code directs us to bring to you to discuss a potential use. And just to clarify for Mr. Cameron, it's not a particular project right now before the Planning Commission. It's more of a discussion about the use type. And so we've had, the memo you have specifies a particular tax lot, but that's just one of several tax lots in the industrial business park, and the slide has the industrial overlay for you of the park in red. Several requests from the public seeking to develop personal storage, mini warehouse type of storage units in the industrial park on properties that are zoned M1, which is light industrial. There is no specific definition in the code right now for the mini warehouse storage facilities. The closest we can come to is storage in the C2 zone, I believe. That allows it, kind of, it doesn't even spell out mini storage, it just says storage or parking, boat and truck sales, automobile, motorcycle. And so because there's no specific definition for us to advise folks calling, the code suggests, per the section of code that I cited in the memo to you, to bring it to the Planning Commission to determine if, you can determine if it's, would be considered a heavy commercial or light industrial use. It could be allowed under a conditional use permit in the industrial park, under M1. It gets really confusing when you look in the code because the uses are nested in different zones. And so I made a slide to try to clarify that for us. Currently, the CM zone, which is, excuse me, it's heavy commercial manufacturing zone, does permit storage if it's permitted in the C2, which it is, as well as the C1 below that. So those uses all go up to the CM. The M1 is the light industrial and the M2 is the heavy industrial. All three, the CM, the M1, and the M1 zones are allowed to be in the industrial overlay zone as uses if that particular use itself is allowed outright in that individual zone of CM, M1, or M2. Because the code doesn't specifically spell out that this type of use is allowed in the M1 zone at all, the code directs us to bring it to you to make a determination if it would be allowed under conditional use permit as either a heavy industrial or a light commercial type use. That's what we're facing right now. And so, to try to clarify this a little bit, there's some recent text amendments that were just approved by the Planning Commission that are in the middle of going to the City Council next. And I did dig around a little bit, and it looks like Dave, our associate planner who retired, did create a definition for mini warehouse personal storage facilities, and he put it in section 1604, which is definitions of the code. He also put it in the code as a proposed amendment. In the CM zone, it would be a use permitted outright. In the C2 zone, it's a highway commercial, it would be a use permitted outright. And CR, which is another type of commercial zone we have, commercial residential, it would be permitted with a conditional use permit. He also did add parking requirements for mini storage, personal storage facilities of 2 parking spaces per 1,000 gross leasable space. That change and that addition to the parking table was listed under the commercial use types of the types of uses where we would look for parking requirements. There's residential, commercial, and industrial. So with looking at that, staff is thinking that this was intended to be looked at as a commercial type of use, not an industrial type of use. And so we wrote this memo up for you to look at and to digest somewhat, if you can, and then on pages 3 and 4, think of some possible conclusions that you could come to in considering whether somebody could open a personal storage mini warehouse facility in the industrial park, in the industrial overlay zone. Where it says possible solutions, there's 4 potential solutions there that I would have you look at. The first one is establish a use type of personal storage facility. Well, when I wrote the staff report and we reviewed it, we had not noticed that Dave, bless his heart, had already put it in the text amendments. So it's already been added to the proposed text amendments that are now on the way to the council. So that would not necessarily be marching orders from the Planning Commission at this point, because that definition has been established. 2 would be to provide staff with direction to make a permanent text amendment to the uses permitted outright or as a conditional use in the M1 zone within the industrial overlay. That's something you could think about and consider proposing staff do, make a text amendment for that. And also 3 is to develop standards and guidelines that the planning director could use to evaluate future requests of this nature in an administrative fashion, so we don't bring it to the planning commission every time we have somebody inquire whether they can do this use type in the M1 zone in the industrial overlay. And also 4 is establish that personal storage and or mini storage facilities are explicitly prohibited in the M1 zone. You can establish that as well. I also wanted to point your direction to the PowerPoint. As we move up the blocks, if you will, there is right now in the code, as we sit here today, the provision that if there's going to be less than 12 employees employed in the industrial park, that takes a conditional use permit to review and get to a potential approval. In reviewing the text amendments going forth to the City Council that was just approved by the Planning Commission as recommended as approval to the City Council, that number 12 has been reduced to 3. So the City Council is going to be looking at that. So that may not necessarily be applicable in this instance. I wouldn't worry about that one so much as to rather whether you think this type of use is going to be.
Isn't it 3 employees per developed acre, not per facility?
I believe so.
That's absolutely.
It says,
So it is a significant
Less-
issue here.
yeah, it says any proposed site development changes in land use, land division, and other action that results in any of the following requires a conditional use in the industrial overlay zone, less than 12 employees per developed acre.
Right.
That
And that's
requires
being
conditional-
reduced.
That's being reduced to a proposed less than 3.
When you said it, though, you said 3, you didn't use the per acre, is all I'm saying. So,
Okay, yes, per
and
acre,
in this
yes.
instance, since we're talking a 12-plus acre area.
That's right.
Even at 3, you're still talking potentially
acre.
30 or 40 people
That's right.
required.
And in reviewing the master plan for the industrial park, and this is in your memo, it seems as though part of the issues here that we can look at concern the overall intent of the M1 in the industrial zone, which focuses on providing development for light manufacturing of goods and products. And also, the industrial zone is to provide a mix of employment opportunities commonly found within industrial parks. So that has to be looked at in an overall way. Is this the overall intent of the master plan for the industrial park and in the overlay zone? Is this type of use one would think of as being in an industrial park? And if we look at the definition that is proposed in the text amendments, where is it? Bear with me. oftentimes, planners will defer to different types of definitions for use types. There's a lot of codes around the country from the American Planning Association that put out various use types that all mean kind of the same thing. And so we're going to look for mini storage, self-storage. There's also the North American Industrial Classification System, which is also a commonly referenced document that we look at to see how uses are categorized. And then you have for traffic engineers, the ITE 10th edition. The traffic engineers look at the different use types to see how much traffic is going to be generated for a particular use. And so what was proposed in the text amendments for the self-storage mini warehouse units, the NAICS, North American Industrial Classification System, categorizes mini warehouses and self-storage units differently than warehouse and warehousing or general warehousing or specific warehousing that's typically listed in under transportation and warehousing. And the way we see industrial park is you want to manufacture widgets. You need warehousing and storage. It's not the same type of storage as mini storage, public storage units. So the mini warehouse storage facilities are more commonly found in commercial or retail areas, and they typically fit in a commercial zone. So I'm going to stop talking because I think I've given you enough information. You've read the memo, and we kind of have the overlay of the hierarchy, if you will, of the nesting of the uses. What's allowed in one could be allowed in another, and so on and so forth up the chain. And it can be a little confusing, I think, but I'm open for any questions you might have.
Jeff, do you, can we go back to the zoning map?
Yes, absolutely.
So I see the C2, but we don't have, and then the CM, so we've already got that in there.
CM
So
is
the-
right in here.
Yeah, right.
So we've already got a provision that allows that in those areas, right?
Yeah, let me double check again.
There is mini storage
gets
in
nested.
CM on 99.
It's nested. So the CM, this is what's interesting, is the CM, what's permitted outright in the C2 zone is permitted in the CM zone. So if you go back to the nesting
Yeah,
slide.
the ladder's up.
It ladders up, correct.
So the ask is to also extend that into the M1. Is that clear?
I mean, you could look at it that way. Not necessarily extended, but because we don't have the nesting of the CM in the M1 zone. The ask is more is if you would you view this as a manufacturing or industrial type use? And specifically, the code directs us to ask you, if I can find my section for the verbiage, to determine whether you would allow it as a conditional use as a either heavy commercial use or light industrial use. Those are the two categories you get to play with per the code to even allow it under conditional
Right.
use.
You're talking about 163220C for conditional uses. It says, conditional uses in M1 shall be as follows, and C says other heavy commercial or light industrial uses as determined by the planning commission.
Correct.
So that's the route for us to say, okay, this could become a conditional use.
It
If
could
we-
come in under that
If we
type of
felt it was
application.
within the intent of the industrial park.
That's right.
And let me add, just emphasis again, Sandy covered it, is there was a specific request that prompted this discussion, but we've had others since then. And so there's other properties that this will affect in the industrial park. So I just wanted to make sure you realized that there could be many, because we've had more than one request to do this. And there is one facility that currently exists in the Pioneer Industrial Park that has dual zoning, CM and M1, that did get constructed.
So just to further that question I was asking, and where I'm going with it is wouldn't it be, I mean, we've already got a provision for it in the CM, right? So wouldn't it be more prudent to be looking at rezoning an area specific for this use?
So when you talk about the rezoning, I'll use an example. You would be eliminating valuable industrial manufacturing zone which can't be located anywhere else in the community. And we actually did that near Fred Meyer for an apartment complex. It was very controversial. There were groups, statewide groups that sent in opposition to eliminating industrial land, especially that is rare, that has a railroad spur going through it that is really hard to find. But there were extenuating circumstances in its nearness to other retail and the need for workforce housing, the dearth of any apartment units available in Canby, on and on and on. And at that time, the explosion of new growth in the industrial park had not started. It had started, but it wasn't in earnest yet. And so we successfully argued that we had way in excess of a 20-year supply of industrial land. If we were to reevaluate that today, maybe
Well-
not.
Well, Brian, if you'll recall, the planning commission turned that down.
Right.
And the city council overrode us. And to this day, I am loath personally to give up 1 inch of industrial land for anything other than industrial purposes. Simply for the fact that we are experiencing that explosion that you just mentioned. And as it turns out, I think that it would have been wise to keep that as industrial land rather than have it rezoned for that development. I'm on the board for what is now the Northwest Industrial Business Association down on Yeon, down by the ports. And that is a industrial sanctuary. And it takes nearly an act of God to get anything in there other than something that is industrial in nature. And in the city of Portland, for a variety of reasons, would just as soon squeeze those really good, high-paying, blue-collar jobs out for political reasons rather than, in my mind, what's in the best interest of the city of Portland. I feel the same way about this, that we need to retain our industrial land for industrial purposes and not dilute it because it will incrementally go away. And that's been my experience down in Northwest Portland. You know, a block here, a block there, and it drove ESCO out of Portland. And so I would, if it were me, I would be going with option 4, which is established that personal storage and/or mini storage facilities are explicitly prohibited in the M1 zone. Because I think we should treasure and value our industrial land. It's not going to come back. You can't go back later on and say, oh, well, I wish we had more industrial land so that we could invite in another American Steel or another Columbia Distributing on whatever scale that might look like. So if you've got a bunch of many storage units or personal storage units, diluting that to a certain degree, then I think that's being very short-sighted.
I might
Personally.
mention that your explanation kind of answers Commissioner Modern's question about rezone to CM. Yeah, there's a possibility if you can find a place in the Pioneer Industrial Park where that might be an appropriate thing to do, and we could argue that we have excess, which you question that we do, because eventually we'll need it all, because we're not likely to put it anywhere else in town.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going to, is I think there's a lot of interest for that area, for the purpose that it's zoned today. I know you guys are getting a lot of applications for those kind of things. I guess I'm curious on the CM and the C2, how much is left over that can be developed there? I mean, are we out of inventory and we need to be looking at other areas for inventory for something like that?
Just in general, let's see, what day are we bringing land needs analysis? It's August, one of your August meetings,
12th is a meeting.
is it the 12th?
No, it's not during their meeting, it's a special meeting.
Oh,
That's right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's August 6th, there's the work session to discuss the land needs analysis, and it has a proposal in there and basically indicates that we have a shortage of commercial zoning in Canby, and that we'll need a place to put that, and it makes a recommendation on where we should put that.
Okay, so we might be adding some more, or at least somebody might be requesting to add more CM land. Okay. That's all I-
Chair,
Yes.
question?
Sure.
Yeah, considering the conditional use route in the industrial overlay for this type of proposal, if the conditional use method were used and was brought as a conditional use, would that overrule the other industrial overlay requirements? In other words, I'm thinking specifically of the employment requirement. If it comes in as a conditional use request,
No.
under,
That goes, they go concurrently, and so it would be a conditional use application, and then there would be that requirement, let's say it still stays at 12 employees. That would also be part of the conditional use review.
okay, so that would not, the fact it came in under a
It doesn't
conditional
negate-
use for CM
no.
would not overrule the industrial overlay employment
It still has to
requirement.
follow.
What I'm weighing here is how strongly I support the alternative number 4, or whether we should leave that door cracked open for other conditional use applications that do still meet employment requirements, but are things that we may not quite envision at this time. So I guess I'm not for prohibiting it outright, but I'm very, very concerned about utilizing land in the industrial zone for this type of project.
We might mention in Sandy's report, I'm not sure she covered it, there's a provision in the industrial overlay that doesn't allow any more than 50,000 square feet of,
It's on page 3.
is it commercial
1,
use?
2, 3, a fourth paragraph down, middle of the fourth paragraph. It says it's section 1635-045S. States that in any M1 or M2 zone within the industrial overlay zone, commercial or retail uses over 50,000 square feet are prohibited.
So we could say that we allow it by a conditional use. They may go back, make an application. It would hold a public hearing. We would evaluate how well they meet the aspirational 12 employees per acre, which Planning Commission has regularly been approving if they don't meet it, and whether they would be violating that 50,000 square foot, because it's possible they might get that many any warehouse square footage in a site this big.
So where I'm sitting right now is kind of regarding code is, we have changes that are going to the city
City
council
council.
soon, and those have all been worked on diligently by us all. But as far as making additional code changes based upon this, I would be inclined to say no additional changes, let the code do the work, as Brian is suggesting, and let it go forward. And in this case, if it doesn't meet the criteria, it's going to fail. And I think the thing I'm concerned about, and hope it does fail, not wishing bad on anybody here, but I want to see more employment than a mini storage. To me, we talk about industrial or commercial. When I think of these things, I think jobs, I think employment. I think let's put people to work, and that's what this land is for. And this is not going to do that. So maybe I'm not being conservative enough here in some of the other commissioners' eyes, because I think the code will provide the protection we need. And I'm looking to staff to tell me, no, Jeff, you're probably a little too optimistic if that's the case.
I can't weigh in right now. I mean, if we get an application, we'd have to review it against the criteria that are necessary to make the findings to recommend approval for conditional use or other type of discretionary application. An application is not before us. I would urge you that you would think carefully about the intent of the industrial park. What's it going to look like in 5 or 10 years from now? Canby is positioned on number 42 neighborhood above Beaverton and some others, and I'm not sure if that was the Portland Business Journal or nationwide. It might be for our area in growth. And we're experiencing extreme development on the housing side, as you know. There's more units being built, there's more coming down. We've had a lot of pre-apps, and people are going to need places to put their stuff. But is the storage units, warehousing, mini storage, is that appropriate in the industrial park, which, as you have mentioned, industrially zoned land is difficult to find in the Portland metro area, even outside of the metro area. And when we're located between Salem and Portland, this is the decision that, has to be contemplated.
So what you're saying is that somebody comes along, they want to have a personal mini storage to store their artificial Christmas trees
Right.
and pink Easter bunnies, as opposed to maybe having a small steel manufacturer.
Widget building.
Widget building.
Widgets. Where are we going to build the widgets if we use all the land for uses that maybe were not thought of to be in that particular area?
The other growing aspect of the personal warehouse is a large portion of it is RV trailers and
You're going to have
boats.
RV boat storage outdoors. probably.
That was what I was originally imagining when I read this, that a lot of it's going to be for that.
I think it's going to be both. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be the structure that has the individual units, various sizes, 10 by 10, 10 by 20,
Yeah.
10 by 30. And then you're going to have an area that might have some covered canopies for that expensive RV and boat, and there might be even some open areas for storage of operable vehicles and whatnot.
But
It could be a mix.
But as I understand it, unless we waive the employment requirement or the future employment requirement, that kind of proposal's not going to go in M1.
Well, again, I was citing the Planning Commission's past actions on numerous conditional uses that were included an application for conditional use because they didn't feel like they would meet the 12 employees per acre. And we felt that those uses were otherwise suitable for the industrial park, and we agreed to waive, well, we didn't really waive it. We granted their conditional use, which in effect.
So you think that
Waives.
weakens our case, Brian, for keep continuing to enforce it?
Well, it's one of the reasons that we propose lowering the 12 employees per acre. And the reason, again, for that is that if we're on a regular basis approving every one of them, it's an onerous and difficult extra application for applicants to have to make. And it's onerous enough that it chases some of them away and they don't even make the application. And when in reality, you'll probably approve it. So if that's true, we should lower our standards.
And I think we are. I mean,
That's right.
isn't that what's going to
We're
council?
To 3,
That's right.
correct.
We're proposing
So
to do that.
that's already in motion
That's
right
right.
now.
That's in motion.
So I'm saying we're going to end up at 3.
Let's say.
And that's still in a facility of this size. Now, if it was a 1.5 acre facility that they were proposing to put some storage on, or a 2 acre facility, it might make some sense to grant a conditional use, perhaps.
And like you said, this is probably a relevant factor because even if we adopted the 3 employees per acre, and maybe we turned it into back what it was supposed to be when the 12 was put in, a firm requirement, and now we make 3 a firm requirement, typically, a personal warehouse facility probably won't meet that either.
Well, the other concern I have is putting prohibitions in. In general, it's one of those things I hesitate to do. When you start listing specific things that you don't want to have in there, and to be frank, this is not what I want in M1, so I'm not sure how much I'm going to resist it if the other commissioners want to provide that prohibition. But sometimes it gets onerous to see all of these things that were put in 30 years ago and have no meaning now, but are still in the code. I mean, those things are in our code right now, and there's a lot of them. And so I'm always hesitant to put in specific, I'll use the word buggy whip prohibitions, because we don't want to be doing that here, even though we haven't done it, or haven't done it for a long time.
Mr. Boatright.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I kind of against the prohibitions too. What bothers me about this is it's asking for 12 acres. If they were asking for a couple of acres, I might be more inclined to agree to a conditional permit.
And this is a potential property, it could be
Yeah,
another property, this is just
Yeah,
an
I
example.
understand, but I just think that, like you say, there are several other people
Yeah,
that
there are.
bought. They're, what are we going to have, 12 acres of
We
self-storage
have
right across?
1.5 acre site that has inquired as well.
Yeah. I think I think right now the code doesn't allow it, and I'm not inclined to agree to a conditional use permit now. And actually, we've asked to reduce the 12 employees per acre before, and the council has turned us down. So that's not for sure yet either.
That's true.
If it was 3 employees per acre, and the site was, they came back and decided they wanted to build a 2 or 3 acre storage facility at some section of this triangle here, I'd be possibly inclined to go along with that. But right now, I don't think we should be giving away any industrial land at all. I think we should leave the code like it is. I don't think we need to put in there that it's an outright forbidden thing, but the code right now, the way I read it, says that it's not permitted, and that's the way I would leave it.
Andre.
Yeah, my thoughts that are similar in nature. I view self-storage or mini storage as commercial and not industrial. It sounds like our revised code is going to have that same language, that self-storage is commercial. You had mentioned a couple different definitions. Does that kind of fall in line with everyone else's definition, statewide, nationwide, as commercial, or so to speak, versus industrial?
Just in thinking about other codes in other cities in the state, I've seen them in commercial zones. They can land up in light industrial or business park type zones sometimes. I've seen them in industrial parks with conditional use, allowed per conditional use. Of course, we could do more research. The NAICS, the North American Industrial Classification System, is pretty commonly used. And it does separate out self-storage units away from specific warehousing and storage. So it is recognized as its own specific use type. And it is often called out as its own use type in other codes. I also know that industrial zone in and of itself is tough to find, tough to keep. And jurisdictions usually, buckle down when it comes to certain use types in those zones. So I've seen it as commercial more times than not.
Yeah, I think I would want to keep it as commercial, and if we're low on commercial land, then we need to add some to the zone and keep them in the right zone so that they're not, end up using other zones that they're intended for. Keep industrial, that's my thought.
Does that give you some sense of where we're headed?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. We let some folks know that have been inquiring about various properties that we would find out what the flavor is of the planning commission and the direction you give us. And they're more than welcome to submit a land use change, I suppose, a zoning change for the future when the text amendments go through, if they go through by the city council. But maybe they can find property that's zoned CM or not, I don't know.
So Sandy and I kind of, we could have made this at a planning director, this decision at a planning director level. But because we had this provision in the code that specifically said, hey, it could be here, and the planning commission can make that decision. If I would have made a interpretation, because we have a chapter in our code that allows me to make written interpretations, and I said, no, we don't think it includes, it's a separate use, it's not listed in our code today, other than maybe as storage, which is allowed in the C2 and the CM. They could appeal my decision. That would put them in front of you right now. The only difference would be, it would be from a written decision I made and a formal appeal application, which costs $250, by the way, now, if you remember. And if they don't like your decision, they could actually appeal it to the city council, but that's an appeal of a planning commission decision, which is $2,000 or something
like that.
application.
19 something.
So I want you to know the process if they don't like the answer they hear from us.
Yeah, because the director's interpretation can be appealed and would land up in front of you anyway. Don't know what they'll do with the answer.
Right. We thought it might be a little bit more customer friendly at no charge to
Yeah.
put it under new business, let them get a flavor of how you might think of it if they were to appeal it to you.
Well, they could apply for a formal director's interpretation, which has a $500 fee to it. That would get them in the administrative loop to be able to appeal the decision, come to you, and go from there, if they so choose.
There are people in the audience. It's not a public hearing, but it's totally up to you when you have people in the audience, if you want to take some input on the topic.
Well, I think Bob's already had his say. That leaves somebody else. So if you could state your name and address and
I'm
interest in the matter.
Lisa Wygant, 24401 South Malina Road. I happen to own the 12 acres, and I understand you want the broader language for the whole industrial park, but there's a uniqueness of some properties, especially that one, how it's configured. It's not conducive to a lot of people out there that want to put in a steel mill or you know, a different kind of thing than a warehouse. I think it's because because this is getting built out here with all these houses. These are all houses, and this is the path. It would be a good fit as a buffer for those people that live there. And again, I understand that you don't want all the industrial park to be a mini warehouse. I get it. We need jobs. We need people to work. But you also need to consider that's the farthest south. There's going to be houses all around that piece of property. It's a weird chunk. And it would be a good fit there.
Okay. any comment?
I can think of other things that could be a good fit there, too.
Sure.
I like the
But it's-
filberts.
Like what?
I like the filberts that are
Oh,
there.
so do the squirrels, yes. Yes, I don't know if they'll like the dust when this, when the harvest starts, the new people next door. But, to have a mini American Steel going 24/7, they're not gonna appreciate that either. So, the noise. And there's not gonna be a whole lot of traffic with a mini warehouse.
There's already metal fabrication going in the area, although it doesn't go 24/7. So,
American Steel goes.
not American Steel, I'm talking about, there's another aluminum fab place
Is
there.
that the BBC or the, what used to be JV Northwest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not even close. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I get where you're coming from, and I get where Bob's coming from, and I understand all that. So I just want to make you aware that because it's a weird piece and the residential right next door, be kind of a good fit. Thank you.
Thank you. So, any last thoughts on this before we move on? Okay. So there's no public hearings, no final decisions, so items of interest from the planning staff.
Well, we've listed the fact that what we have on our August 12th, which would be our next regularly scheduled meeting. We have a minor land partition that creates a flag lot, and we have a text amendment to our temporary vendor ordinance.
Can you give us a flavor of what that is going to entail?
The temporary vendor
Yeah.
ordinance, it's a pretty simple change. Why don't you tell them, Sandy?
It's so simple, we're gonna,
Yeah,
It's changing the, currently you can have a temporary vendor permit for 3 months, and then it's renewable for another 3 months. That's,
yeah.
yeah, 90 days. So we're going to be basically proposing an amendment from that 90 days to 270 days.
How much?
To 270 days.
Another 3 months.
Another 3
270.
months, basically.
Okay, 9 months.
And
Somebody's
so-
have to keep coming
so
in and
that's-
paying and renewing
yeah.
it.
That keeps it temporary, but it makes it, there's a potential for a few different businesses that have approached us in the back of taking advantage of that extra time to be temporary.
And that's the only change proposed with that text amendment.
Sure, Sandra, I will not be here on the 12th.
And I will, yeah. And you mentioned the inventory analysis on the
Yes, I was
6th.
gonna-
It's August 6th.
I wanted to mention that again,
Joint
that
work
that's
session.
Tuesday, August 6th, in the Willamette Room, right across the hall here, at 6 to 7:30, a joint work session with the city council.
And I think I've already forwarded that. I'm out of
Yes.
town that week, so.
That's right. If you want to review the
We'll get you a
information.
copy of it.
We're hopeful we're going to
Oh, yeah, I'd
distribute
love
the
that.
information tomorrow, and that you could review it if you wanted and send any written comments
I'd
to
be
the
happy to do that.
I will be at the August 6th meeting. But I will not be at the August 22nd, or not August 22nd, the August 26th. Is that right? Just one that I'm not going to be at because I'll be on vacation as well. So,
In August, I have a grandchild being born around August 12th, so.
The
depends
timing
on
of
her.
that.
I can't miss that.
That's great.
nor should you. Okay.
Great.
I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just
say I motion that we adjourn.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, we're done.